The first time they told me I'd be mentoring a new hire, I didn't think much of it. I'd been in the company for over a decade, and onboarding people was part of my rhythm. I'd show them the ropes, share the unwritten rules, and help them avoid the mistakes I once made. That's what veterans do, right? But this time, something felt different. Her name was Madison, fresh out of business school, all confidence and sharp heels, the kind of woman who seemed born ready for corner offices. She was polite, sure, but she carried herself like she already belonged at the top. I brushed it off as nerves masked by bravado. I'd seen that before. My manager was vague when he introduced us. "She'll be shadowing you for a while. Learn everything you do. No timeline, no explanation, just an order." I didn't question it. I should have. For weeks, Madison followed me everywhere. I showed her how I managed client relationships, walked her through the reporting system I had built from scratch, explained why this client needed a personal call instead of an email, and why that vendor would fold if you pushed too hard. She took notes like a court stenographer, nodding at all the right moments. At first, I felt proud. My work was complicated, nuanced. It wasn't just data, it was relationships, trust, the kind of capital you can't buy. Watching her scribble every word down made me feel like maybe the years I'd poured into this place actually meant something. But then small cracks appeared. Madison wasn't just learning, she was rehearsing. She started using my exact phrases in meetings, claiming them as her own. She presented my ideas with a polish that made them sound new, as though she had conjured them overnight. The bosses clapped, impressed with her initiative. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. But then came the slip, the one sentence from HR that made my stomach drop. "Transition will be smoother this way." Transition of what I asked, but HR smiled that empty corporate smile and said, "Don't worry, it's all part of the long-term plan." That was the moment I realized what was happening. I wasn't training a colleague. I wasn't mentoring a new team member. I was grooming my own replacement. And I didn't even have a say in it. It's one thing to feel undervalued, to suspect that leadership doesn't see your worth. It's another thing entirely to watch them systematically dismantle your position right in front of you, using your own hands to do it. The sting wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. But I didn't know then that the same woman I was forced to train would one day end up knocking on my door, begging me for work. Looking back, I should have seen it coming long before Madison showed up with her notebook and bright lipstick. My company had always been obsessed with fresh talent. They worshipped youth, quick wins, and shiny resumes over loyalty, depth, and hard-earned wisdom. If you were young and could string together a flashy PowerPoint, you were a star. If you were older and carried battle scars from years of actually making things work, you were comfortable, which was corporate code for replaceable. I had poured more than 10 years into this place. I had weathered mergers, budget cuts, and 2 rounds of layoffs. Each time I stepped up, carried extra weight, and made sure the clients never felt the cracks behind the scenes. But instead of rewarding, that management treated it like an obligation, as if the company owned me because I cared too much to let anything fail on my watch. Meanwhile, the golden kids got the spotlight. I watched them parachute in MBAs with no real-world experience and hand them stretch assignments that were nothing more than my projects with a shinier cover page. They'd present the same ideas I'd been proposing for months, but somehow coming from them, it was innovative. From me, it was routine. The favoritism was blatant. Promotions always went to the ones who looked good in front of executives, not the ones who actually kept the gears turning. I lost count of how many times I sat quietly in the back of the room while someone else presented my work. My manager would nod at me afterward as if that pat on the back could erase the fact that I'd been erased in public. And the culture, God, the culture, they preached collaboration, but what they really meant was don't rock the boat. Anyone who questioned leadership was branded negative or not a team player. That's how I learned to swallow my pride and keep moving, Because rocking the boat never got anyone promoted, it just got them fired. So when Madison came in, I thought maybe this was just another cycle, another rising star they'd parade around for a while before she realized the grind wasn't as glamorous as they promised. But the deeper we got, the clearer it became. She wasn't here to shadow me temporarily, she was here to replace me. And the worst part, the company never had the decency to say it out loud. They just smiled and let me do their dirty work for them. It cut deeper than I expected, not just because I was losing my job, but because it confirmed something I had been trying not to believe in their eyes. I had stopped being valuable the moment I stopped being shiny. I wasn't just betrayed, I was disposable, and the quiet humiliation of being forced to hand over my life's work piece by piece, that was the wound that would never leave me. The breaking moment didn't come with a dramatic announcement or a loud confrontation. It came with a calendar invite. Transition planning, final steps. The subject line sat there in my inbox like a silent bomb. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just another project handoff meeting, the kind we'd done 100 times. But when I walked into that glass-walled conference room, the truth landed with brutal clarity. My manager sat at the head of the table, flanked by Madison, her new leather notebook closed neatly in front of her like a trophy. HR was there too, smiling, that empty corporate smile I'd seen during past layoffs. I didn't need to sit down to know exactly what was happening. First, we want to thank you. My manager began, his voice dripping with the kind of rehearsed sympathy that makes your skin crawl. You've been an invaluable part of this organization for many years, truly. But as we continue to evolve, it's important that we align our leadership with fresh perspectives. There it was, fresh perspectives. Their polite euphemism for your old news. I felt the words washing over me in slow motion, every sentence cutting deeper than the last. Madison didn't say much, she didn't have to. Her silence said it all. She had been given my seat and I'd been reduced to a footnote in her career. HR slid a folder across the table. Severance package, non-disclosure agreements, the whole sterile checklist of corporate betrayal. But here's what burned most. It wasn't the loss of the paycheck. It wasn't even the insult of being cast aside. It was the fact that they had used me to do it. I had spent months arming Madison with every skill, every shortcut, every nuance she needed to succeed. I had handed her the very tools they would use to erase me. And as I sat there staring at that folder, I realized I had two choices. I could let this break me leave quietly and let them write the story of my exit. Or I could decide right then and there that this wasn't the end of my story. I didn't show it in that moment. I nodded, I signed, where they told me I even forced a thank you through clenched teeth. But inside, something snapped. They thought they had stripped me of power. But in reality, they had handed me the sharpest kind of motivation, the clarity that I had nothing left to lose. And that clarity was the beginning of my rebuild. Walking out of that building for the last time, cardboard box in hand, I thought the humiliation would crush me. Instead, it lit something inside me. For years, I had been giving away my ideas, my strategies, my systems to a company that saw me as disposable. Now those same skills were mine to keep and mine to use however I wanted. I didn't broadcast my plans. I didn't post long rants on LinkedIn or drown in self-pity over cocktails with friends. No. I went quiet. Silence was my weapon. The first thing I did was reconnect with people I trusted outside the company. Old clients, vendors I had negotiated with for years, former colleagues who had landed elsewhere. I didn't ask for favors, I simply let them know I was available. To my surprise, many of them admitted they had followed my work more closely than I ever realized. "If you ever go out on your own, call me," one client said. "We'd sign with you in a heartbeat." That sentence replayed in my mind like fuel. Meanwhile, I studied Madison's moves from a distance. I still had friends on the inside, and they kept me updated. She was polished, yes, but she lacked depth. She could present a plan, but she couldn't improvise when something went wrong. She could repeat my methods, but she didn't understand the instincts behind them. I knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks showed. While she fumbled, I built. Nights turned into early mornings at my kitchen table as I drafted a business plan for a consultancy. Nothing flashy, nothing corporate glossy, just real practical solutions for the very problems I'd been solving for years. I invested in a simple website, set up a professional email, and worked on a pricing structure that undercut the bloated fees of big firms. Every step I took felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had tried to erase. I wasn't too old, I wasn't outdated, I was experienced, and that experience had value. By the time I landed my first client, it didn't feel like luck. It felt inevitable. And once the first check cleared, the fear that had gripped me after the firing evaporated, replaced with something sharper, stronger certainty. Madison might have taken my seat, but I was building something bigger than a seat at their table. I was building my own table, and the day would come sooner than she expected when she would realize the difference between borrowing someone's playbook and writing your own. Success didn't come overnight, but it came faster than I expected. Within 6 months, my small consultancy had more work than I could handle alone. Word spread quickly. Clients didn't just want solutions, they wanted me. They wanted the woman who had held their hands through crises, who knew their quirks, who understood the difference between what looked good on a report and what actually kept the lights on. Every contract I signed felt like another thread pulling me further away from the humiliation of that conference room. And here's the kicker. Some of those contracts came directly from the same pool of clients my old company had once claimed as their crown jewels. They trusted me, not the glossy presentation decks. They chose substance over spectacle. Meanwhile, Madison's shine began to fade. At first, she was paraded around as the company's rising star. But Polish doesn't pay the bills, and recycled charm doesn't hold up when real problems hit. She stumbled through client meetings, missed critical details, and botched negotiations that I could have handled in my sleep. Inside sources told me the clients were restless, whispering about looking elsewhere. And elsewhere turned out to be me. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. When I picked up, a hesitant voice said, "Hi, it's Madison." For a moment, I thought it was a prank, but no, it was her, the same woman I had been forced to train. The same woman who had sat silently while they slid the severance folder across the table. She wasn't calling to gloat. She wasn't calling with confidence. She was calling with desperation. "Things aren't working out," she admitted, her voice cracking. I need help. Do you have anything? Even part-time work. I just need something steady." I sat there in stunned silence, the irony of it washing over me. This was the woman who had been handed my career on a silver platter. And now she was the one knocking on my door, begging for scraps. The sweetest revenge wasn't slamming the door in her face, it was the power of choice. For the first time in years, the power dynamic was completely reversed. I didn't need to scream, "I told you so." I didn't need to rub salt in the wound. Just hearing her ask, humbly, nervously, for work from the very person she replaced was enough. And in that moment, I realized something deeper revenge doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it's quieter, simpler. It's just living well enough that the people who underestimated you can't help but notice. And Madison. She noticed. When Madison hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time, staring at the city skyline outside my office window. The irony of the moment had been almost too perfect. The woman who once embodied my lowest humiliation was now the living proof of my resilience. But as the days passed, I noticed something interesting. Her call didn't feel like the climax of my story. It wasn't the revenge plot I had fantasized about in those dark, bitter early weeks. It was something subtler, almost gentler. Because by the time Madison reached out, I didn't need validation anymore. My clients respected me. My calendar was full. My business was thriving. And more importantly, I had rebuilt my self-worth. I didn't measure my value by the company that discarded me, or the boss who thought I was replaceable, or the woman who tried to fill my shoes. I measured it by the lives I impacted, the people I employed, and the freedom I had earned. Madison's downfall was a footnote, not the headline. What really mattered was how I had transformed that betrayal into a foundation for growth. My consultancy wasn't just profitable, it was purposeful. I made it a place where no one would ever be blindsided, in a conference room where people were valued for their contributions, not their convenience. I created the kind of culture I had once craved. That was my real revenge, building something better. And yes, there was a part of me that smiled at the poetic justice of Madison asking me for work. But instead of gloating, I chose to let the moment remind me of how far I'd come. I didn't need to crush her. Life had already handed her the lesson. My role wasn't to be her executioner. It was to decide what kind of leader I wanted to be. So I made a choice. I gave her a small project, nothing flashy, nothing permanent. Just enough to let her regain her footing. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. Because I refused to become the kind of person who tore others down to feel taller. Looking back now, I realize that the legacy of my story isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation. I reclaimed my confidence, my career, my dignity. I turned pain into power and betrayal into opportunity. The company that thought I was expendable became irrelevant. The boss who underestimated me faded into memory. Even Madison became less of a villain and more of a symbol of what happens when you build your life on borrowed ground. But me, I built mine on resilience, and that will always last longer than luck.